We lost along this endless road. Okay, let's go ahead and get started here. Put you on my reading stream. And what else was I doing? Oh, that. Okay. So, we are on chapter 14 of the Cloven Tree. Add a little light there. A little glare, but it is better. So, chapter 14 of 20, I believe. Um, so, jump right on into it. I'm trying to switch over to OBS because the Twitch um, studio is going away in a few days. But, well, I don't know if it's going away or not. It's just, they're not going to support it anymore. I don't know if that means they're just going to kill it altogether or if it's um, they just won't do any more development on it, or I don't know. But OBS is giving me fits trying to get it going, so we'll get it worked out though. All right, chapter 14, strategic ground. The switchback. Wait a minute, how's my? Okay, sounds good. The switchback was at the end of the nameless lines of hills that the missionaries and slaves and their pursuers were following. The hills ran nearly directly southward, the last western edge of the foothills of the polar spine. The path along these hilltops was fairly smooth, nearly level, and it continued to just north of the southern race, starting again a few miles south of it. There's a typo there. Going until the hills were lost in fens, eroded away by the water that filled the swamps. While Gant was fighting to become Kruchark's chief underling in the region, the forts guarding these hills had been destroyed, along with their warlords. No warlord left after the 10th battle had the power or reason to rebuild them. The southern race broke the line of the hills by forming ridges that cut through every other formation in the Kilia until they became the normal, gentle, rolling hills that were the western edge of the Wintherian, less than 40 miles away at that point. These ridges, north and south of the race, imposed themselves upon the rest of the region with despotic dominance, and had not done so gently. When the race was formed, the line of hills was broken, and the southernmost of the northern hills was cut off from the others by a gouge that had since formed a 10 to 12 foot deep dip between the last hill and the ones to its north. This dip had eroded into a gully that dropped off the ridge line on both sides of the hill. To the north and east of the gully led back into to the north and east. The gully led back into the broken remnants of other foothills of the spine to the east, dead ending in a broken ruin just a league eastward. To the west, though, the gully turned abruptly southwest as the hills were crossed, and then sloped into the ravine that had been formed when the hills south of the last one were reduced to rubble or absorbed by the dominating ridge. Okay. And we are apparently in a ad. So I'll hold on for a second. It's supposed to end in just a few seconds. And then we'll get back to it. Okay, it says that we're back. So you didn't miss much. He was just describing the hills. Erosion had also caused this ridge to form its own water drainages, and some of these went north into the ravine. One of these had drained to the northwest, merging with the gully from the north half, a mile to the from the north half a mile to the west of the hill line. Some of these sentences. At that junction, it was possible for anyone to cross from the hill to the ridge by simply switching back to the direction that was desired. Over time, this gentle passage had become common knowledge, making it a strategic piece of ground in the normally tortured Killia. The general of the Grand Regiment was very angry. He hated the kind of fighting that the terrain of even the western Killia dictated. The land was ideally unsuited for heavy cavalry, and prudence demanded that he dismount many of his units to provide support for those that remained a horse. Worse, the warlords had turned out their garrisons. That nailed him to the floor. He had to keep enough soldiers here to aid in case plans changed again, and the missionaries tried to cross north of the race. If nothing else, his command helped pin down any orcs not fighting each other. It meant, though, that he could not afford to send support to Acklen, not until he knew the three undead companies patrolling the Killia hadn't used the chaos to flank him, or worse, cut off the missionaries. Plans could change again, and he had to keep all options open. No matter what, he had to find them. Then he saw the mirror signal. The 3 Legion patrols had been located. Suddenly smiling like a striking shark, he issued orders. 3 Legionnaire banners might be enough for His Highness's injury. In any case, a crown prince of Wintherian's house had been wounded while with his grand regiment. His soldiers wanted vengeance. Ildric watched as the soldiers of the High King methodically destroyed another pair of orc companies, one of them Krauger's, one of them Arendorf's, the two having been so engrossed in each other that they failed to note the presence of the men until it was too late. "We ought to help," Sergeant Rahl said, the senior survivor of Lassiter's doomed expedition. "With what?" the Gorog officer replied. "60 of us when we ain't trained to each other, and the enemy has us outnumbered, with the others still killing each other." He took a breath as he watched the slaughter, then continued. "That's the 7th Company we've seen since your lad feathered that lord. 7th Company in a league. That means they're here in force, least a brigade. If the others realize the danger, then we help. But till then, let the dumb ones die. I can still have the archer killed if you want." "No. He's going to be needed if we want to make it back to my fort, and it ain't his fault the damned lord moved at the last minute. I'm also betting that he had poisoned the shaft." Rahl nodded, and Ildric smiled at the confirmation. Besides, it had been a beautiful shot, even if it had missed the messenger. The sapper team reported to Lellebrin. I don't know, he jumps around enough sometimes that it's difficult to follow. So now we were with Lellebrin. "We left hundreds of wagons on the trail, cousin," Taurus said, most haphazardly. "We blocked it in several places completely, though with fire, stones, or a few barricades made from the wagons, or a barricade made from the wagons. We left a few traps as well, nothing too elaborate. We're hoping that they think we are the diversion." "What kind of traps?" Oxbow asked. "Fire weirds mostly. As a dragoneer I was taught some wizardry, and many tripwires." He raised his hand to stave off Oxbow's protest. "Most of that would be only a nuisance, I know, but there are hundreds of abandoned horses following us. I think the flesh demon's presence is driving them south, even the ones Lord Thames cut loose. They will be pinned by the barricades, and the undead will have to clear them to go around. Or hopefully the animals will be so panicked by the Hlemiok that they'll stampede back north," Sergeant Wilmer added. "If we have to, we could abandon most of the wagons and run south." He stopped as Oxbow shook his head. "The trail ahead gets too rough. We'd have to abandon all the wounded, and our own horses are too spent to sprint through it. Captain, those traps are great for men or orcs, but if there are undead behind us, they'll buy us maybe half a day. I'd wager that the undead are only hours behind, less than 5 probably. Lellerbren looked around, and seeing that none of the slaves would hear, quietly spoke. Thou art correct, Captain Oxbow. Curtis hath spoken of an odd pain in his leg while deluded. Methinks it is the wound he hath upon his knee. Oxbow hissed. He took that wound in the 11th battle. It was given him by a Hlemiok, he recounted grimly. If that's troubling him, they're too close. I agree. We need a rear guard to delay them, yet I am reluctant to order such. We have not enough trained personnel as it is, nor would defensible terrain help much against a flesh demon. I'll ask the mages if they can think of something. I know they're near spent, but nothing else comes to mind. Lellerbren agreed. So Oxbow went to speak with Otherin. Then he, Oxbow, and Braster fell behind the column, even passing the freed slaves who were stragglers. Send the word up the column, Oxbow said to the last group, who were about 10 minutes behind the rest. Don't anyone go back up the trail, or they'll get caught in a trap. Dand, the leader of this group of the freed slaves, pulled Oxbow aside. You're driving us too fast, Owen, and we can't keep up. Just keep 'em moving south, Oxbow replied. Dand shook his head. We're going a different way, Owen. We're going to try reaching the race through one of the other gullies, or the lookout trail. We're tired of the forced march. You've another reason, Dand, Oxbow said to the man, another member of the old Killian raiders who had been recaptured. Spit it out. He nodded. I don't like the fact that you're working with Curtis again. I've no love for the man. You know why. Sadly, Oxbow agreed. He's paid for his mistakes, Dand. Paid for 'em more times over than I can count. If that ain't enough, I'm trusting him with my life and that of my son. I can't, Owen. I was caught again during the 7th battle, and the only family I got left are these folks that you just freed. I can't risk 'em, not for Curtis. He helped free you, too. I know, and he must have done something right, 'cause he's still soldiering, but I can't take that chance. Oxbow understood. Fair enough. Move off this trail and don't try to come back to it. We're going to set a trap in case the undead follow, and the trap will spring for you as well as them. If you make it out, and I hope you do, seek out the Crown Prince. He's hovering outside the Killia with a grand regiment. Ask him to see to Fentown. We can always welcome old friends and their families. Thanks, Owen, Dand said, as they clasped hands, then hugged. Good to see you again. I was glad to find out you're not dead, Oxbow said as he nodded in reply. Make sure to keep your folks off this trail, 'cause I don't doubt the undead are coming like a stampede. We won't come closer to it than the lookout until the undead are gone, Dand replied. His group headed southwest. What's the lookout trail? Braster asked. We used to use it to spy on this one, Oxbow said distractedly. We did a lot of fighting along this road. It was guarded till we got rid of Gant. It's too slow for us, but if he watches from it, he might be able to sneak back to this one when the shouting's over. Otherin set to work as Oxbow watched Dand go out of sight, southwestward. Taking a box from inside his robe, the elf opened it and began placing small game piece-like figurines on either side of the trail that they had followed. Placing a dozen, he concealed them in the grasses that were the most common type of plant life on this trail. He then spoke a weird that took him 3 minutes to complete, nearly collapsing from exhaustion when he was done. Still, he seemed satisfied as he studied the trap he had made. It will work. When the pursuers cross the weird threshold, the battle golems shall reach their full size and engage them. They will fall back if pressed, so the pursuit shall be required to fight a running battle until they break off or succeed in destroying them. Battle golems? Braster asked. I thought wizards were forbidden to use such. Theron clarified the restriction. We are reluctant to use them, but having them as rear guard to save lives from the undead will not compromise any of our principles. Will it work? Braster asked, his curiosity satisfied. They will engage them. Nothing more can I promise. That'll do. Nothing uses time as a run and fight, Oxbow said. Through the rest of the day and the night they headed south, now coming into the third dawn since the battle at the fort. Still striving for more speed, Lellobran noted that Curtis's pain slowly faded as the afternoon came. He began to hope that the reinforcements on the north border of the race would not be necessary. Still, he tempered his enthusiasm, wondering if Lord Thames would escape or if he already had, and Lellobran worried over his mounts. The pace they had set over the last 3 days had drained them. No matter how he had cared for them, measured the pace, or switched teams. Once they reached the race, they would have more mounts and be able to spread the burdens they carried even further. More important, they could go at a faster, less aggravating pace that even the undead could not match, and they would be clear. Almost exactly 2 hours before dawn, 4 days after they left the fort, Lellobran sent Braster ahead to ensure that the enemy did not hold the last hill. He returned less than 3/4 of an hour later with hot hands. 244. Okay. Excuse me. Captain Lellobran, we failed. The orcs from the fort got past us and seized the switchback. They nearly took the hill as well, but there we held. We couldn't move them from the switchback, and they closed with us too quickly for the relief platoon to aid us. We're cut off. Before dawn, they crossed the gully that separated the last hill from the ones to the north. This gap had been worn to nearly 10 yards in width. It was only 3 to 4.5 yards deep where it crossed the hills, though it became deep gulch after it crossed to the west. The southern wall of this gulch wore thin until 60 feet or so westward. It fell completely away, and the gully became a wide ledge that descended to the ravine floor. On the east side of the hill, where the gully turned northward, a spur roughly 6 to 10 feet wide jutted off the hill to the northeast for just over 20 feet before it was undercut by the S-curve of the gully that washed back eastward. A dragon had once commented that from above it looked like a misshapen ladle. On the southeast side of the hill, which was over 90 yards north to south and twice that wide, a ledge below the top of the hill jutted out and downward to the south and southeast, adding dozens of yards to its surface. This ledge disappeared into the ring of bushes that covered the southern slopes. Thames was relieved to see them. The running fight with the Gorgers had nearly killed him, and his command was down to 30 able-bodied, with an equal number of wounded. Lellobran had thought his animals were in poor condition, but Thames's surviving mounts were utterly blown, many with dried lather still around their mouths. Thames' supplies were equally hard used, nearly gone, with his arsenal the most depleted of his stores. Among us all, we might have 20 arrows left. I feel fortunate to have one weapon for every person. I lost over 20 people trying to take the switchback, and twice that many animals. We were heavily outnumbered. The rest are dead? Dead, scattered, missing. The pace I had to run guaranteed that people would be left behind, but we saw the orcs racing for this point. He took a long pull on the water skin Therion had brought him. One of the scouts I had said that a company of the undead was following you. Lellibern nodded. Now that we are here, could we force our way through the switchback? Probably not. The orcs are too far back for the other party to assist us, and are too well dug in. I have not seen such discipline among goblins before. What if we made fire wagons to drive them from their position? Therian asked. No, their actual main position is on a rise just west of the switchback itself. It's 10 feet higher than the switchback, and wagons would break on it. That would seal it off for them. Perhaps if the dwarves could build some form of siege engine. Brander shook his head. Not with the materials or the time we have, not facing an opponent half a mile away. If we could, it would probably have the same effect the fire wagon would. Perhaps a full-out charge? No, Curtis said, coming up. The others were surprised. Curtis had been unconscious most of the time since they left the fort. Not with the wounded we've got. Not unless all us are warriors. And the south slope's too steep for a horseman to ride up it. Legion men are following us, ain't they? Yes, Tim said, and they briefly filled Curtis in on the events of the run to the race. So the golems will slow 'em down, you think? Yes, if anything can. All right. Ackland's in that group over there, you say? I heard him shouting, "Stand to," Hot Hands confirmed. That's the best news I've heard in a month. He'll have sent riders to the Grand Regiment. Once he figured that we're cut off, reinforcements will be coming. If they get here first, we'll either cross the bridge they build, or we'll have the switchback cleared so we can go. Till they arrive, we ought to build defenses. We still have some wagons from the fort, don't we? Wilmer nodded, and Curtis continued. What's left in 'em? Water, fuel, some tools, including weapons they were stockpiling, and lumber. Brander replied, seeing what Curtis was driving at, despite his exhaustion. They were fortifying the castle. Then he sagged a little. The ballistae in the wagons were designed to be templates. Their metal parts were meant to make molds. They were not sturdy enough for combat. They ought to work once, though. We need to fortify this hill. Stakes, trenches, fire pits, everything we can do. It's just after dawn. I'd expect the corpse soldiers to be here sometime today. The hill won't hold all the wagons, Braster objected. Disassemble them, Lellibern noted. The hopelessness... disassemble them. Lellibern noted the hopelessness in his heart. This is a weird sentence. Lellibern noted, the hopelessness in his heart crushed by Curtis's optimistic common sense. He is right. We must prepare defenses, and the wains are useless now. I had intended to abandon all but 2 of them anyway once we crossed to the race. Assemble ballistae, palisades, and prepare every implement and person for combat. Lord Therian, prepare a means of destruction for the book, lest it return to enemy hands. Sergeant Braster, he went on, assigning duties. No one spoke of the Helemiach that was accompanying the legionnaires, not wanting the hopelessness that Curtis had broken to return. The work progressed immediately. The defenders soon had the northern face of the hill filled with wooden stakes of all sizes, from the spur, which was almost entirely rock, to the western end of the hill, where a tree had grown tall, standing over the gully. There it dropped over 30 feet from the hilltop. At the point where the gully first dropped, they built a wall with boulders, stones, hay from the wagons, broken wagon wheels, deadfall, and whatever they could find, including dead horses. Lellibern moved as many of the wounded as he could to the lower edge, and Arthur and Rorhan, now nearly completely recovered from their injuries, saw to them at first. Next, they sadly realized that 40 of the horses were too badly injured to keep alive without the help of an animist mage, and were forced to put them down. Some of these corpses were added to the barricade, the others butchered to supplement the dwindled supply of food. Sadder still, especially to Lelebren, were the wounded that had expired in the hard drive to the southern race. Nearly 20 wagons were full of dead and dying freed slaves, and they had no room and less time to tend to them. They were able to separate the dying from the dead, but could only devote the barest attention to the corpses. Finally, they loaded 7 wagons with them and took them down the gully, half a mile east of the spur, and left them there with their teams still in harness, hobbled with water and feed bags, hoping they would be able to see to them after the battle. Oxbow had every food animal left also butchered and over a fire before the sun was over the horizon. He cooked every vegetable that they had in the pots they had saved from the hundreds of abandoned wains. The fruit stores he husbanded much more carefully, saving most of those for the wounded and the mounts. Water was in much greater supply, as Thames had sent several water wagons south to Lelebren before he left the fort, and Oxbow was able to even heat bath water for the injured. Leftover heated water was rationed among everyone else. Oxbow gave the last of the warm water to those caring for the mounts. Then he began the task of melting animal fats for oil. Once started with that, he organized teams of slaves to smoke the hides of the butchered animals, building frameworks from their bones to help him clean entrails for acid and to make more ropes. They would not be properly cured, hide or gut, but decades of fen frugality told him some use would be found for them. Brander and his team were the busiest. Every wagon was unloaded, and they had to travel a mile back up the trail to a young grove to cut down small trees to have enough stakes. The big tree on the hill they left alone, a natural sentry that blocked the use of ladders and was too tangled for anyone to climb through without an axe. Cutting it down would have taken too long besides, so they enchanted it against fire and smoke. Scores of wains were disassembled. Wagon axles were used for more stakes, and they used the wagon planking to form defensive barriers both next to the tree and south of the spur. They braced these walls behind with heavy stones, and in front lined them with spikes and stakes to channel the enemy through the center, where they would be more readily vulnerable to fire. Hides were draped over traps, battlements, shield frames, or slaves, as the freed folk had little in the way of clothing, let alone armor. Every knife, sword, or axe was given to a defender, individually or reserved for a team, and they gave battle assignments to everyone. Once the hides were curing, they began fastening weapons and armor from the animal bones, mostly helmets, shields, stakes to pin undead down, or torches to ignite them. As for fuel, besides the fat Oxbow was melting, they had barrels and casks of oil and liquors that Thames had sent on some of the last wagons he sent south, told of them by quick-thinking dwarves. To this they added animal fodder, coal, charcoal, tinder, and discarded wood from the wagons and defensive preparations. Several trenches were cut in the hill, aided by makeshift plows, and they built up redoubts on the hill as the chief defensive points. The freed dwarves helped Brander's team with the digging and assembly of battlements and ballistae. Once the trenches were cut, the plows used, and the battlements heaped, they took the surviving healthy draft horses and hobbled them down in the East Gulch as well. The freed slaves contributed greatly to all these tasks, and for the most part the defenses were finished by 3 hours after dawn. With that they slept in shifts, the mages still taking the least rest, for they were concerned over the wounded. particularly Owen. The other leaders found little sleep, however, posed with the problems of crossing the ravine, overcoming the orcs at the switchback, and the pending battle with the undead. Foremost was preventing the book from falling back into enemy hands. With arrows and crossbow bolts, they were able to send ropes across the space to the ridge north of the race. The mages were there used their arts to splice the ropes around pulleys. They were able to send over nearly 70 of the gravely wounded or very young slaves, and receive some more supplies. But in the attempt to send the book over, a sudden swarm of flies devoured the entrails before the basket carrying it could clear the hedge of the missionaries' hill. The second attempt brought a swarm of insects that devoured the normal ropes. Next, the dwarves tried using a catapult, but as they prepared the second ranging shot, the wagon axle throwing arm snapped from the strain. The catapult was ruined, and they did not have the time to build a better one. Next, they launched a ballista bolt tied to a rope into the other hill. They fashioned a rope basket for the book to be carried in, but Orgroth and Vlanshra had seen their activities. While the members of the party were watching the book, 3 orcs crept up the ravine with 2 of the undead. When the book was halfway across, the orcs managed to sever the rope with thrown boomerang knives. 2 of their foes were killed and the third wounded, but the book, for which they had shed and spilled so much blood, was nearly lost. As the 2 legionnaires slowly crawled back to their unit, dragging the wounded orc with them, Wilmer had to crawl deep into the thicket surrounding the crown of the hill to recover the tome, where it had finally fallen when its cradle had slipped off the damaged rope. A second attempt with the ballista failed when the device broke. Fortunately, no one was hurt. Desperate, they impaled the book on another ballista bolt to simply shoot it across. The bolt immediately disintegrated. Finally, Otherin levitated it, or rather tried to levitate the book across the ravine. The book did little more than quiver despite the grayed mage's efforts. Aldemar added his power to it, and still nothing happened. The other mages all joined in for a few seconds, but the book refused to budge. Otherin called it off after some moments. We cannot not send it across. The book defieth our power to move it. To punctuate this, it seemed the pulleys that had been used earlier all shattered. Okay, so something's holding the book back, that's for sure. And we've got about 3 pages left in this chapter. Then now we ought to see about destroying it, or at least hiding it so they can't find it, Curtis remarked. Follow them back, Captain, Braun said to one of his platoon officers. The enemy has been cornered just north of their goal, and so we need not beat our heads against this wall. Let us waste no more of our power here. Braun was pleased. The horse barricades had been something he had not anticipated, and the golems had fought for nearly a day without being destroyed. He had begun to think the enemy might escape after all. He went to despair. Oh, so we jumped over to the orcs and the undead. Vlanshra has been able to contact me. The raiders are trapped north of the ravine. They do have a relief unit on the southern hill, but it is not large enough to take the switchback. So Orgroth flanked them, the demon said, smiling evilly. That means you were right. We shall laud him and his orcs with praise. Do they still have the book? Yes, they attempted to send it across but failed. Now they have given up. Excellent. Why have you pulled back from assaulting the golems? The question was only out of curiosity. In the 2 years since Wraith had renamed him Despair and promoted him, the flesh demon had never seen Braun to be incorrect. We will reach the battle more quickly. This kind of golem is not locked to a place or a creator, but a purpose. If we continue to fight them, they will have to be destroyed. That will take us another day at least. Now they will lose their purpose and disintegrate within hours. We are within 2 hours of the hill at a slow pace. We shall be engaged with them before dusk. On the hill, directly above the race, the relief company watched in frustration. 80 strong, they had been waiting for nearly 2 weeks, and now they could do nothing. They had no dwarves, but Acklin. But Acklin was satisfied with the defenses that they had constructed. They had built them up in the first 10 days, and until the missionaries sent some wounded over, there was very little to do. Despite this, the new troops had maintained discipline, though idle, for half a week, which made the situation all the more frustrating. They could hold this position for a month, but the soldiers that they were supporting may as well have been on one of Kelgum's moons, instead of being stuck on the shorter hill 75 yards to the north. Initially, 2 of the younger sergeants had suggested posting men on that hill as well. After considering it, Acklin had rejected the idea, not having enough men. Acklin also knew it had been the right decision. Hells, he thought, it was still the right decision, and would be even if the situation were repeated 100 times. 80 men could not adequately defend ridge and hill. Combat, however, is often a business of extremes, sometimes absurd ones, and so it had proven in this case. 20 men Turk had proposed, or even 12, and if they had been there, Thames would have had enough archer support to have raked the orcs, to have driven them from the switchback instead of the reverse. This was particularly true given the supporting power that those on the southern hill could have brought to bear. At worst, they could have brought the orc ranks below 200, and then the remaining warriors on this hill could have charged, leaving just enough mages to hold it. True, it would have been hairy, but even with the score of legionnaires, he doubted that the orcs would have been able to stop them. Yet having a disciplined group of infantry downhill from a cavalry unit, infantry equipped with neither lances nor archers, was such an absurd hypothesis that no professional warrior would train for it. So, now we wait for reinforcement, Acklin muttered, as he went to report to the young captain who was in command. The junior officer was adequate, which pleased Sergeant Master Acklin, but the man still had to be blooded before Acklin would report to the general that he was ready, which was why he had been temporarily reposted from the 12th Scouts to begin with. Fortunately, the young captain had read between the lines when the general told him to listen to his chief sergeant, and had made no decision with which the sergeant master had patently disagreed. Briefly, Acklin summed up the situation. Captain Lellebrand's digging in, and the orcs are holding the flank. Based on the actions of both of those units, I doubt that they think another unit is pursuing. I judge that they think another unit is pursuing. Probably legionnaires, though not necessarily so. Why legionnaires, Sergeant Master? What about the behavior of our friends and enemies suggests them? The young officer desired experience, and Acklin sensed this. Mainly it's instinct, sir. Here legionnaires would be the most probable pursuit force because of the 3 companies that patrol the region. The young nobleman, officer, sighed in appreciation. I was thinking that it would be rare for 2 groups of orcs to coordinate, making corpsmen more likely. That's true too, sir. Have you thoughts on anything else that we can do? The old commando shook his head, and the young would-be commando nodded again. I haven't either, other than using the 2 blitz lines that we do have to put as many on the other hill as possible. As quickly as possible, but I think that would be premature. Do you agree? Yes, sir, I do. If we put too many on that hill too soon, then the orcs can take this hill, entirely defeating our purpose. Then we wait. And that is the end of that chapter. That puts us at chapter 15. And let's see how much. Yeah, there are 20 chapters. I know I've looked at that before, but yep. So that is the end of that. Yeah, it was a fairly short chapter tonight. And we're getting pretty far into the book. You can see my bookmark there. Well, obviously, we're 15 chapters out of 20. But anyway, let's see. Shall we go over and see what somebody else is doing? Let's see. You know what? What is Sea of Stars? I don't know. Let me check it out real quick. I've never heard of Sea of Stars. Oh, it's some top-down thing. I hate top-down games. I just, I don't like them anymore. I don't have to play them, so, yeah, all right. We'll just skip it this time. I will just see you tomorrow night for some Fallout New California. See you then.